The Vanishing Volvo. 3 friends hopped into a blue Volvo on a rainy afternoon, waved goodbye to their families, and effectively drove off the edge of the earth. They all thought it would be a simple joyride, until it wasn't. Gay Dolhua, his brother Robert, and their friend left their homes that morning with no particular destination in mind. None of them held a valid driver's license, but that didn't seem to matter. By midday, a massive rainstorm hit Gothenburg, flooding streets and reducing visibility to near zero. Their Volvo was last seen driving toward the city's limits before disappearing from all sightlines completely. But as the men vanished, the city's police were paralyzed by the Frogman robbery, a bizarre bank heist in which thieves escaped through Gothenburg's pipe system. Every patrol car was pulled away, so no one searched for the Volvo. The case of the missing Volvo only became serious when police realized that a 4th man had also vanished from the city during the storm. Massive searches of the Gothenburg harbor and canals were conducted, but days turned to months, months to years, and no one found the blue Volvo or the 4th missing man. Because no car or bodies were ever found, Swedish law couldn't officially declare the men dead. Their families waited in legal limbo, unable to grieve and unable to move on. To this day, 60 years later, the case remains open. The Sarah Joe. It's September 10th, 1988, and marine biologist John Naughton is surveying an uninhabited area of the Marshall Islands when he notices something on the beach. As he gets closer, he sees the hull of a missing boat and a grave. This is the Sarah Joe boat, and it vanished nearly a decade earlier. 5 friends had departed in it for a normal day of fishing. However, by afternoon, a sudden violent storm hit Hawaii. Thus, the Sarah Joe was last seen by another fishing boat struggling against that storm before it completely disappeared. The Coast Guard had launched a massive search for the boat but found nothing at the time, so the families assumed that the boat had been destroyed and all 5 friends had died. But 9 years later, John Naughton finally discovered the Sarah Joe 2,300 miles from where it disappeared. Near the wreck, the scientist and his team found a makeshift grave with a cross and a pile of coral stones. Whatever was buried there wasn't supposed to be found. When they opened the grave, they found human bones and small squares of spirit paper, a traditional Chinese burial ritual. However, none of the 5 friends were Chinese, and this land was supposed to be uninhabited. Forensics later confirmed that the remains belonged to just one of them. It turns out that this one man survived long enough to be buried by a stranger, and for the other 4, they vanished without a trace. The 3 Watchers. On December 26, 1900, the vessel Hesperus arrived at the Flannan Isles to drop relief packages for workers at the lighthouse. But when the crew fired a single rocket, there was no one on the docks to respond. The relief keeper climbed the steps to the lighthouse entrance and found the door unlocked. As he stepped inside, he noticed that a single set of heavy oilskins hung alone on its peg. One man had run into a December gale completely unprotected. The 3 on-duty keepers were seasoned professionals. In fact, one of them was a highly experienced veteran of the lighthouse service. They all knew that leaving the light unattended was a firing offense, so their disappearance made no sense. After the relief keeper called investigators, they concluded that the men must have been swept away by a rogue wave while attempting to secure equipment, but there were no heavy storms in the past 2 weeks. Still, there was one strange detail. Investigators found that the iron railings of the lighthouse, which stood 110 feet above sea level, were twisted like licorice. Additionally, a 1-ton rock had been moved far from its original spot. Nothing, not even a rogue wave, could have done this much damage. Despite the inconsistencies, the official report was filed declaring that the men had been lost at sea. The case was officially closed, though no bodies were ever recovered. The Münsterland case. Münsterland, West Germany. On February 13th, 1971, a dark-haired girl stood by the roadside, thumb out for a ride. This was Edeltraud von Pohl, hitchhiking from her workplace. Eventually, she got a ride, but she never arrived home. Weeks later, her body was discovered in a nearby forest with clear marks of strangulation. While police were trying to solve Edeltraud's murder, another girl by the name of Barbara Storm disappeared while hitchhiking home from a disco. Her body, too, was found 2 days later in a meadow, clearly strangled with her own clothing. But the disturbing detail in both cases was that both victims looked identical with long, dark hair. Then, in that same year, another girl was killed in the exact same way, and she too had long, dark hair. This was when the police realized that the killings followed the same pattern: women with long, dark hair along the B9. Immediately, the authorities started a massive hunt for the killer, going as far as interviewing thousands of drivers. While no arrests were made, the killings suddenly stopped. So the manhunt hit a brick wall. In 2015, authorities reopened the case using DNA. This would have been helpful in finding the killer, but the dead bodies were too degraded to be useful. And in the end, the killer was never caught. If these disappearances feel unsettling, the next cases are gonna hit even harder. So buckle up, subscribe, and let's dive in. The Frozen Village. Fur trapper Joe LaBelle walked into a village near Lake Anjikuni, calling out for a greeting. While this village was meant to be busy, there was no one in sight, and it was completely silent. As he walked around, LaBelle entered a hut and found a pot of stew still hanging over the hearth. He moved to another dwelling and discovered sealskin shirts with needles still stuck in the seams, as if the women had just stepped out for a moment. After checking the whole place, LaBelle fled to a telegraph station and had a journalist publish a story about the empty village. But the report became more disturbing when LaBelle revealed that there were graves that appeared to have been recently dug out bare-handed. Strangely, when investigators conducted an official inquiry into the place, interviewing local traders and missionaries, no one knew about the village. When they arrived at Lake Anjikuni, they found nothing. No huts, and no evidence that anyone had lived there for years. Investigators dismissed the village. They said LaBelle made it all up. But what no one could explain is who emptied those graves and why. The Bleeding Mountains. While standing on the Kamar-Daban mountain range, Alexander Sasha Selivardov suddenly fell to the ground. His eyes rolled back, and blood started to leak from his ears. No one knew what was happening. The group leader, a master survivalist and elite instructor, tried to help him, but as she got close, she too collapsed over his body. This was when panic turned into madness. Instantly, the remaining 5 hikers started ripping their clothes off in the snow and banging their heads against rocks. Disoriented, they clawed at their throats until they finally collapsed in violent spasms. Now, this wasn't a group of novices. These were elite athletes led by one of Russia's best instructors, and they were only a short distance from safety before everything went fatally wrong. 17-year-old Valentina was the only one left standing. She hid in her sleeping bag for several days, listening to the sounds of her friends dying around her. When the screaming finally stopped, she hiked down the mountain toward a river where tourists eventually spotted her. With Valentina's help, rescue teams reached the site via helicopter and found 6 bodies scattered across the ridge. The official cause was hypothermia, but the symptoms never fully matched the explanation. To this day, no one knows what exactly killed them or why Valentina didn't die like the others. The House of Plenty. 17 Norwegian sealers were trapped by a sudden ice pack at Grey Hook. They've got just 2 options: stay with their ship and freeze to death, or row to Cape Thordsson, where Swedish explorer Adolf Erik Nordenskjöld had built a large, well-stocked cabin called Svenskuset. They chose the latter. In October 1872, the men reached the cabin and found it in perfect condition, filled with fuel, tinned beef, vegetables, and condensed milk. They were the luckiest survivors in the Arctic, but that didn't last very long. According to the group's diary, the men remained in high spirits until a month later, when a mysterious illness began striking them one by one. It started with their teeth falling out, and soon they were extremely confused and disoriented, all 17 of them. Just after New Year's Eve, the first man died, In the weeks that followed, they began dropping like a house of cards. Those who survived were too weak to bury the mounting corpses. Eventually, 5 months after their arrival, the last Norwegian hunter died. Since the team didn't radio back for months, a relief ship arrived to check on them. However, as the rescuers opened the door to Nordenhold's cabin, they found a room full of corpses. 12 bodies inside, 5 more at the back. Meanwhile, there was plenty of unopened food on the shelves. For over a century, people slandered the men for supposedly failing to exercise and prevent scurvy. However, in 2008, a doctor petitioned to exhume the bodies to clear their names. And what they found was not what everyone expected. All 17 men had very high levels of lead in their bones, so high that it destroyed all their organs. Turns out, the lead soldering in the tinned food cans had leached into the food, poisoning them with every meal they ate. Nordenheld never knew this, but at the time he offered them his cabin, all the food had been poisoned. The cabin that saved them ultimately became their grave. Pound of flesh. A man walked out of a blinding blizzard into the remote outpost. This was Alfred Packer, returning from the San Juan Mountains. While he looked fleshy and calm, there was something off about him. Packer claimed his 5 companions at the outpost had abandoned him or died during the brutal winter. While he told this story, he began spending hundreds of dollars at a local saloon, money that belonged to the men who supposedly wandered off. A month after Packer's return, a search party reached the campsite. There, they found 5 bodies laid out in a row with axe marks on their skulls like they were shattered from behind. But the most disturbing part was that several strips of flesh had been removed from the bodies. When asked, Packer claimed that the oldest man of the 5 died first and he was eaten by the others. Later, he changed his story, saying it was his companion who killed them. However, the investigators discovered that the axe marks on the body matched Packer's own tools. That was when he admitted that he killed and ate them. In the end, Packer was arrested and sentenced to death. The Chibok disappearance. Chibok, Nigeria, April 14th, 2014. Armed men in military fatigues arrive at the government secondary school claiming to be security forces sent to evacuate students from a nearby threat. As the girls climbed into the trucks, the alleged soldiers set the school on fire. Only when the convoy pulled away into the Sambisa forest did the girls realize that the soldiers were terrorists who had come to kidnap them. This was one of the most powerful groups in the country, and they just walked away with 276 schoolgirls. Right there in the Sambisa, 57 girls risked their lives by leaping from moving trucks into pitch-black thorns. Though they escaped, the fate of the remaining 219 was unclear. Exactly a month after the kidnapping, the leader of the group Boko Haram released a video. In it, he claimed that he abducted the girls, adding that he was going to sell them in the market. The Sambisa forest is twice the size of Belgium, filled with landmines, caves, and militant camps. In other words, the Nigerian government couldn't just drive into the forest and snatch the girls back, so they called the international forces. Between 2016 and 2017, secret negotiations involving the Red Cross and the Swiss government led to 2 releases in exchange for detained militant commanders. But over 90 girls were still missing. Nearly a decade later, some girls were released from the forest, but they weren't children anymore. They were mothers carrying the children of their captors. In the long run, the group was never brought to justice. The Street Angel. In November 1988, California police stood in a flower-filled backyard watching as a shovel hit something hard beneath the roses. It was a human leg bone wrapped in a bedsheet. While detectives were stunned by the discovery, the elderly homeowner calmly asked if she could go to the nearby hotel for a cup of coffee. When they said yes, Dorothea Puente vanished. As the excavation continued, the police realized that the backyard was an improvised graveyard. Bodies were found stacked and buried under the very flower beds the kind landlady used to tend. There were 7 bodies in total, all tenants who had supposedly moved away. During the 1980s, Dorothea Puente operated a boarding house for the elderly and disabled with no close relatives. She was known for taking in the homeless and mentally ill that no one else wanted, but Dorothea wasn't as sweet as she seemed. She would her tenants, bury them in her backyard, and forge their signatures to steal their monthly checks. She stole more than $5,000 a month, and this continued for years. The case only broke when a social worker refused to believe Dorothea's claim that his 51-year-old father had simply gone on vacation. Eventually, Dorothea was arrested after a man she met at a bar recognized her from the news. 5 years later, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. If you thought these cases were unsettling, wait till you find out the horror hiding behind images in 12 photos with terrifying truths